Budgeting, as boring as it sounds, was the number one tool that helped me save and invest my way into being retired from a 9 to 5 job before the age of 40. I went from being the person who would get paid, and before I knew it, all of my income was gone and I would end up in overdraft. And this was a consistent pattern every month, to being someone who has built a portfolio that now funds my lifestyle. Like many young people, I was of the impression that budgeting was for the elderly or perhaps my parents, and I never really paid much attention to it. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the very basics of putting together a budget. Nothing complex, very straightforward. You don't need to use a fancy app, but of course, if you'd like to, then please do. But having a budget is your plan to winning with money in the long term. I've had quite a few emails from some of you lovely individuals asking me about the first steps to take before investing. So you've said to me, right, Jumoke, it's all well and good. I'd love to invest, but right now my finances are in shambles. So how do I actually get to the point where I have residual income left over at the end of every month so I can plow that into my investments? And so I thought this was a very good video to address that point. If you're new here, hello and welcome. My name is Jumoke and I am an investment banker turned early 9 to 5 retiree. On this channel, we talk about all things personal finance, financial freedom, and life in early retirement. If that sounds interesting to you, do not forget to hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell so you don't miss new videos every week. So we are going to build what's called a zero-based budget. This is where every single unit of income you make is accounted for. And I've put together a very simple yet effective budgeting template. And frankly, it's the only one you really need. So if you'd like a copy, please let me know and I'd be more than happy to provide this. I'm based in the UK, so I'm going to use the pound sterling as my currency. So let's head over to my desktop as I walk you through the template. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is to create categories, and you'll see why this is important later in the video. You essentially separate all of your money into 4 main categories. The first category is going to be your income. The second category is your expenses. The third category is your debt payments. And I like to separate these because your expenses can vary from month to month depending on your lifestyle, but your debt is typically a fixed amount. So if you've borrowed £5,000, the only thing you need to pay back is the interest and the £5,000. And this is a figure that is amortized or paid off over time. So that's a fixed figure. And once you've paid it off, it's done. Whereas your expenses are on a recurring basis. And the fourth category is what I like to call your future fund. So what we're going to do is we will first introduce the categories and then we will plug in some numbers into our template. It's less daunting this way and it's a lot easier to follow. Okay, so the very first thing we need to do is to know how much money you bring home. That is money that gets paid into your account at the end of every month, which is your pay after taxation. And this will comprise of your salary, any commissions you get, and I would say your average commission because commissions can change one month to the next, but a basic idea of the average is all you need. And to get the average, you simply calculate the sum of your commission over the last maybe 3 or 6 months, and then divide that figure by the number of months. So if it's 6 months, divide it by 6. If it's 3 months, divide it by 3, etc. You could also have income coming in from investments or perhaps any rentals you get from properties that you own. Basically, anything that is cash coming in, you want to plug that into this category. Okay, so then we move on to our next category, which is our expenses. I have further broken this down into 2 groups. Again, when we come to the end of this, it'll be very obvious why this is a very helpful way to do it. Here, you account for things like your housing, any rent, any mortgages, if you own your property, any taxes, insurance, and the like. You also want to include things like your petrol or your gas if you own a car. But if you don't own a car, you can use your monthly transportation costs if you have to take the trains or perhaps the buses. Then you account for food and sustenance, your utility bills, any TV licenses, water, electricity, council tax, or any sort of housing association taxes that you may have to pay, as well as your mobile phone bill. The next thing you want to account for is your health insurance, if that's something you pay for. If you're a student or perhaps a professional who still has to take courses and examinations, you want to capture this under education. Things like paying for the courses, any supplies you might need, and so on and so forth. Now, for any of these, if you don't have the exact figure, you can use an average of what you've spent over the last 6 months. especially for variable items like food and gas or petrol. You don't need a figure down to the second decimal place. You just need an approximation. And as a reminder, the way to calculate an average figure is to take the sum of your monthly figure for the last, let's say, 6 months and divide that total figure, the sum of those 6 months, by 6. And that will give you your average monthly figure. Then we move on to the second group within your expenses. And this is a group that I like to call your wants or your nice to have. And this is because these are non-essentials, they're not necessities. And so you can pretty much do without them, maybe. Okay, so here we are going to capture all of our subscriptions and our memberships. So things like Netflix, your Spotify, your gym membership, etc. The next line item you want to capture is retail therapy. So shopping, clothes, shoes, accessories, and the likes. Here you also account for things like getting your nails done, your hair, massages, restaurants and eating out. You might be a regular giver to charities or philanthropic endeavors. All of that can be captured here. And the last category is your miscellaneous or your fun money, because whilst we want to secure our futures financially, we do not want to be miserable about it. We still want to enjoy our everyday lives. Awesome. So now we move on to debt. So this category will include things like your credit card debt, any auto loans you have, student loans, personal loans, and the like. Then we move on to the fourth category, which is my personal favorite, apart from income, of course, your future fund. This will include things like your savings, any investments, so investments in stocks, index funds, ETFs, starting a small business. If you're looking to buy a house, you might be putting away money on a regular basis towards buying a house, or maybe even into your Roth IRA or your retirement fund. All of those will be captured in this fourth category. Great. So now that we understand what each category is and what goes into it, let's try plugging in some numbers as examples. So here is a completed template. These are just examples. Your personal or perhaps your household numbers may be higher or lower. It really doesn't matter. As long as you can capture the numbers with some degree of accuracy, that is the most pertinent thing. But I've actually tried to map them to the average cost figures in the UK just to bring some reality back into it. So once you have all of these numbers plugged in, you want to add them up for each category. So for example, here your total income comes to £5,000 and your total expenses, i.e. for both groups, comes to £3,550. Now, the ideal situation is for your total expenses and your debt repayments to be less than your total income. And this is because you want to put that extra or residual income into your future fund. So keep in mind that we are building a zero-based budget, and that is our goal here, to have your income minus the outgoing categories equal to 0. But as you can see in this example, we have a negative, so we are over budget by £600, and I've done this for a reason. So earlier I mentioned that breaking it down into categories, and what's more, breaking down your expenses into 2 groups or 2 subcategories is very helpful, and this is why. If your income minus your expenses and debt repayments is negative, it essentially means that you are spending more than yourself or your household earns, and you are borrowing money from your future self, whether that is through an overdraft or a loan from family members or a friend, or even a payday loan. These amounts do need to be paid back in the future. So essentially, you are borrowing your income from your future self to fund your current consumption. On the flip side, if your income minus your expenses and your debt repayments is positive, it means that you have some extra income left over to give to your future self through savings or investments. And this is what goes into your future fund. Easy enough. Now, if your balance is negative, this is where we want to think about where we can reduce certain costs. So the first category to look at is your category 2, Group B, which is your wants and your nice to have category. And this is why having categories is brilliant, because it's a super quick glance into some of the things that aren't absolute necessities and are pretty much luxury. And so from this group, we can think about cutting back on a few items until we have our finances in good standing. And you might be thinking, well, the reason it's negative is that we have our future fund in there, so we can just cut that out. Well, the whole idea behind building this budget and trying to be more financially intentional is so that we can start building something towards our future. So this future fund, in my opinion, is absolutely essential. So if we want to get on the path to financial freedom, this section is really non-negotiable. Okay, so let's look into our wants group to see where we can cut a few things out. So under subscriptions, we can look to reduce this to maybe £60. Under shopping and clothes, we can look to bring that down to £75. Again, this isn't a necessity. So if you want to cut it out altogether, that would be fantastic. Okay, next category to cut out would be our nails, our hair, our massages. Maybe bring that down to £80 a month. And then we can look to reduce eating out, just temporarily until we have our finances in a healthier position. So if we bring that down to 0, maybe again reducing our charitable givings to £50, and fun and miscellaneous money, again for a short while, maybe bring that down to £50. Okay, so we still have £5 left over. So I think we'll take this from our clothing and our shopping. So there you go. Now we have a 0 balance on our budget, which is fantastic. What this means is every single penny is being accounted for. So as you can see, this template is super easy to use. It's very beginner friendly. And I'm sure you noticed that as we changed the numbers in the want category, these percentages were also changing, which is fantastic because you can see everything at a glance. So if I wanted to know what percentage of my expenses goes on food and sustenance every month, all I have to do is come over to this donut chart here and look for the reference. So here, food accounts for 14%. Fantastic. So you can see that on a month-to-month basis, this template is very dynamic and it changes according to your inputs, i.e. the numbers you put in there. And like I mentioned before, you do not need a fancy app for this. You can do it in Excel, again, which is my personal preference. But there are some fantastic apps out there that you can use. Great. Okay, so if you're in a position where on a monthly basis, you still have your balance being negative, i.e. your expenses as well as your debt is more than your income, we need to start working towards reducing your debt as well as your expenses so that you have residual income left over every month that you can plug into your future fund. But please be kind and patient with yourself because this entire process will take a while. It's not something that will happen in even a month. It might take a little bit longer than that because you are essentially reverse engineering a pattern or a behavior that you're used to. So it's going to take some time to get into the habit of spending less and even reviewing this on a monthly basis. It does take a little bit of commitment, but I can promise you that once you get to the other side of being broke, it's totally worth it. Now, you may be budgeting to either get out of debt or maybe to start looking after your future self. Whatever the reason is, I can guarantee that you won't regret creating a budget for yourself or your household. As with many other things that require improvements, this will take some commitment. But if you're serious about transforming your finances, you will create the time as well as the space for it. If you don't know where you are or where your starting point is, it's a lot more difficult to get to your destination of being debt-free or financially free. And the fantastic thing about utilizing a budget is that it is free, it is at your fingertip, and it's so easy to use. So if you found this video helpful, do not forget to share it with a friend or maybe a family member who might benefit from the information. And if you aren't subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss new videos every week. I've thoroughly enjoyed today's video, maybe because it has something to do with Excel, but thanks for watching and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.